Message to temporary employee. On behalf of the entire organization, we would like to thank you for filling in tonight. We do not doubt the offer arrived last minute, and we apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused you. Our usual night watchman had a family emergency, so you are doing us a huge service by being here tonight. On top of these expressions of gratitude, you will also be compensated 5 times the average hourly rate. The temporary employment agency has been informed of these unique circumstances. Hopefully they briefed you on the agreement ahead of time. At first glance, your duty for the night may appear simple, but we strongly urge you to stay vigilant. For the duration of your shift, you will remain at the post in the reception area. Your job is to ensure that no one enters after hours. The door you entered through is the only entrance into the compound. All employees are aware the night watchman is the only person permitted in the building past operating hours. You are unlikely to run into any trouble, but we operate under the belief it is better safe than sorry. Just remember to stay in the reception area during your shift. Thank you again for filling the position. We are confident in your success. P.S. The doors deeper into the facility are chained for your convenience. You are the only person in the facility, and the chains should not be unlocked for any reasons. No exceptions. I finished reading the letter for the second time, and looked back at the key sitting on the desk. I hadn't noticed it when I first walked in because it was underneath the paper with my instructions. I hadn't tried to use it, but judging by the size, I was almost certain it fit the padlock keeping the doors in the postscript of the letter chained. With the paper still in my hand, I made my way to the doors. The majority of the reception area resembled a doctor's office, in both furnishings and sterility. There was even a stack of beat-up magazines on the coffee table in the middle of the sitting area. Saying the chain door stood out in the room, that was a bit of an understatement. They were thick metal pocket doors that, even when pulled together, appeared to have a lot of unseen surface area deep into the walls on either side. The tops and bottom of each were reinforced to the point where I was pretty sure a truck would have a hard time getting through. The handles of each door bolted and welded tight to the surfaces. A hefty metal chain snaked through both of the handles and held together by a substantial padlock. Both doors were covered in stickers reading some variation of, "Warning, door must remain closed at all times." More than a few written in different languages. For a short time, I stood in front of the massive doors before returning my attention to the key on the desk. I tried in vain to piece together why someone would say there are no exceptions to keeping a door closed, but leave the key so easily accessible. Especially someone who didn't even require a proper background check before being hired for a single night. I threw my hands up, waving the white instruction paper as a sign of unconditional surrender. It wasn't like this job had been conventional from the start. Jobs I got from the temp company usually came with information about necessary skills or a description of duties ahead of time. This offer hadn't even listed the name of the company. I hadn't heard of Homa Dynamics before walking up to the strange hourglass logo on the front door. Before reading the instructions, the only thing I knew about the gig was that it was a night shift, the address, and the obscene amount of money they were paying. Unfortunately, the last piece of information was enough to ignore the red flags. I was falling behind on more than a few bills, and making 5 days worth of money in a single night. That would let me pull my head above water for the first time in a long while. Retreating back to the desk, I placed the key on top of the instructions, folded the paper, and slid it to the far side of the desk. There was a younger version of myself who wouldn't have hesitated to unlock the industrial doors and explore a secretive company's compound. But the decisions that version of me made was why I was in my 30s working temp jobs to attempt to make ends meet. So, I was happy to sit behind someone else's desk and be grateful I had been able to pay off my data plan last month. For the first few hours, keeping myself occupied was really the only difficult part of the job. Around 3 in the morning, I had gotten bored of social media, and my battery was starting to die. I had just started flipping through an ancient highlights magazine, and wondering why any kid would be hanging out in this waiting area. And that's when I heard something. At least, I had thought I heard something. A faint slam that could have been something falling off the shelf or a door closing somewhere on the other side of the chain doors. I looked up from a spot the difference photo comparison. I was embarrassingly struggling to find the final difference and looked towards the door, straining my ears to see if there was any follow-up to confirm I had heard something in the first place. A little while passed in complete silence. I closed the wrinkled kids magazine and made my way back to the coffee table in the waiting area. I was in front of the chain metal doors when there was another bang, either louder or closer than the last one, and unmistakably the sound of a door slamming. I stopped mid-stride and turned my head towards the chain doors. The hairs on my arm and neck at attention, and my mouth suddenly dry. In my mind, I reread the part of the instructions telling me I was the only person in the facility, and there was only one way into the building. Another extended period of total silence. But I wasn't able to shrug this one off. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, but I was feeling bold. I came to the decision that if I could get closer to the door, I might be able to hear better. If I didn't hear anything else, I could chalk it up to a door or two being blown closed by a breeze. I made my way towards the chain doors, being sure to walk as quietly as possible. Deep down, hoping if somebody was in the building, they hadn't realized I was here too. Standing below the doors, they looked more massive than my first impression. Again, standing quietly, trying to hear anything on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes in some attempt to focus more on my hearing. There wasn't another slamming door, but a few times, I thought I heard something. A repetitive soft tapping, just at the edge of my range of hearing. But it was possible my mind was playing tricks on me. I understood what needed to be done. With my eyes still closed, I carefully put my ear against the cold metal door. I kept my breathing shallow and steady, to not pollute my ears with any extra noise. And I listened. I didn't hear anything right away, but as my ear adjusted, I could tell there was definitely something making noise beyond the doors. A chill washed down my back, and I realized it was closer to me than the slammed doors had been. The taps were constant in their production, but not in location, moving back and forth around the building, sometimes getting closer, and other times further away. Footsteps. I stifled a gasp when I came to the realization. I was certain they were footsteps, but there was something off about them. There were too many at any given time to be a single person, but they moved too uniform from place to place to be a group of people. A cold sweat came over me when I started wondering what combination of that information could mean. I knew I needed to get away from the door and let someone know, but my instructions hadn't left any contact information. Pushing gently away from the door, I wondered if there was maybe a phone number in the desk drawer. I was only halfway through the thought when a metallic clatter directly beside me shattered the silence. I opened my eyes and looked down at its origin. The children's activity book I'd completely forgotten about was tangled in the chains, causing them to make contact with the metal door. I clenched my teeth and hoped I hadn't been noticed. For a short silence, I was hopeful, but that hope quickly evaporated as I heard the footsteps. Far away at first, but getting closer fast. The continuous thud of far too many feet closing in directly on my location. Without breaking my eyeline on the door, I backed away from the approaching clatter, dropping the magazine that sold me out in the process. My back pressed against the exit when the thing first made contact with the chain door. Sudden heavy pounding erupted from the other side. A moment ago, the door seemed impenetrable, but now, I watched as it shuddered with each hit. Turning to the exit, I placed my hand on the knob, but it wouldn't turn in my hand. I looked down for some sort of latching mechanism, but there wasn't even a keyhole. The realization I had been locked in from the other side hit me in waves. With the slamming getting only more intense behind me, I desperately pushed on the door with my full body weight. For a few moments, I was lost completely in my goal of escape. I was flooded with so much fear. I hadn't even registered the assault on the chained door had halted. I was still trying to force the exit open when I heard a voice. "Excuse me? Is there someone out there that can help me?" The voice spoke in a calm, disjointed manner. It sounded like it was coming at me from all directions. I abruptly stopped pounding on the exit and felt my shoulders relax. Without really thinking of why, I turned back towards the warning-covered metal doors and stood silently. I was unable to answer the voice's questions. "Thank goodness you're there, friend. It's embarrassing to admit, but I fell asleep at my desk and they must have mistakenly locked me in here." I took a step towards the large doorway, still unable to speak to the voice. But for some reason, that inability didn't seem very important. "I'm gonna guess you aren't the usual guy. I apologize if I gave you a scare, friend. Would you mind doing me a huge favor and grab that key off the desk beside you?" I continued to slowly move towards the chained doorway, but I veered a little to my right towards the reception desk when he said this, my hand hovering over the folded paper where I had left the key. What a wild situation, right, friend? Usually I'd just wait for the workday to start, but my phone is dead. I bet the wife and kids are worried sick about me. Just go ahead and grab that key. my attention still on the door. I grabbed the paper and dumped the key into my hand. Friend, you're a lifesaver. You'll need to stick around after your shift. The guys aren't gonna believe me when I tell them. Just put the key in the lock and let me out. Moving briskly now, I clutched the key in my hand tight enough to draw blood. My other hand reached out for the lock. Before even getting to the doorway, I have no doubt I would have opened the door if I hadn't stumbled on the highlights magazine on the floor where I dropped it. The unexpected movement breaking me out of whatever hold the voice had on me. I winced as a sudden explosion of pain entered my head. Friend, come on now. I just need you to put the key in the lock and let me out. Don't make me wait here all night. I'm starting to get hungry. The voice sounded less casual, and now held an undertone that was decidedly less human than before. Still, I could feel it washing over me again, and I felt the need to unlock the door. So I did the only thing I could do. I lightly slid the key between the crack where the pocket doors emerged from the wall. It was easily big enough for the thin key to slide through, but far too small for my hand to get it back. An immediate cacophony of pounds met the other side of the door where the key left my hand. The large metal slab shuddering against the attack. I retreated once again to the exit on the other side of the room, but I didn't try to get through this time. It was clear that my only chance of safety was the chain doors. For hours, the thing behind the chain doors, it alternated between besieging the door with its might and silences while it recovered its strength. Each renewed assault seemed like it would be the last. The metal doors shook against its attacks, but they never gave out. After a particularly long silence, I assumed the thing was prepared for the final charge. Instead, the exit door it was pushed tightly against gave way, and I fell backwards into the early morning light. I blinked in surprise, looking up at a confused man wearing a lab coat. I recognized the familiar hourglass logo embroidered over the name tag that read, Dr. Brown. Jesus, are you still? Dr. Brown started to say, but caught himself before he finished. I mean, you must be the temporary night watchman. Nice to meet you. Maybe I should have pressed him for answers or even gotten up and punched him. But in that moment, I just continued to lay on the ground in disbelief. Well, looks like great work tonight, Dr. Brown said insincerely, while craning his neck to look at the reception area. Looks like the door is still locked. Do you mind heading back in for a coffee or tea? I was on my feet before he finished this sentence and sped out of the parking lot as fast as possible. My last memory of the building was Dr. Brown in the rearview mirror on the phone. From his body language, he didn't seem happy, and it didn't look like he had any interest in going inside. I own a lot of crap, so a few weeks ago, I started making weekly dumps to my town's donation dumpster. At first, it went well. At first, most donated stuff goes right to the landfill, but I somehow convinced myself I was doing the community a huge favor. Someone's going to love this 20-year-old cassette tape of Disney songs, and this unidentifiable laptop charger. Yeah. It was on Sunday that things got weird. I got to the donation dumpster about 9 p.m., threw in a big bag of clothes I hadn't worn since high school, then a VCR and a bunch of old Metallica posters. My wife even came along and threw in a few jeans. We were about to leave when I heard it, a soft rustling sound from inside the bin. Did you hear that? Yeah, my wife replied. The sound continued, soft and probing, as if small little feet were padding through the clothing, searching for food. Sounds like a squirrel got in there. I stared at the opening, a pitch-black rectangle, totally unpenetrated by the light of the street lamp above. I hope I didn't injure it with the VCR, but the rustling didn't sound offbeat, like it would from an injured animal. It was uniform, just a soft padding sound around the bags and clothes, barely audible through the metal walls. Come on, let's go home, my wife called, already at the car. I took one last glance at the dumpster, then got back in the car. Next Sunday, I was back at the dumpster, armed with more junk. This time, stuff that could ostensibly be used. I patted myself on the back extra hard for donating shoes that only had one hole. In went the shoes. In went the CDs, tied up in a little bag. In went another gigantic bag of clothes. I turned away from the dumpster, brushing my hands off, really quite proud of myself. And then the rustling sound began. This time, it sounded more hurried, frantic, like a starving animal in desperate search for food. I heard tiny feet running across the plastic bag's surface, something brushing along the shoes. I think it's still in there, I told my wife. What, the squirrel? What if it can't get out? Now that I thought about it, how could the squirrel get out? The walls were smooth metal, nothing for the squirrel's claws to hook onto. Maybe it could take a flying leap when the junk got high enough, or escape when the dumpster was opened and emptied. But when would that be? It could starve to death before then. I think we should help it, I said. Okay, how? I glanced at the surrounding forest. Deep shadows gathered from under the trees, and I couldn't see far past the tree line. I'm gonna grab a stick. I walked towards the woods. It was silent, eerily so. Not even a soft rustle of wind through the trees or leaves, or a stick snapping from a deer. Just silence. Not wanting to venture into the forest, I reached up and snapped a branch off the nearest tree. I'll put this in, then the squirrel can use it to climb out. That proved to be easier said than done. However, the hole was recessed back into the metal, and the stick wasn't that long. I leaned my body up against the dumpster, then threaded the stick through the opening. I didn't feel the end of the stick hit the pile of junk yet, so I extended my arm all the way, my hand inches from the opening. But when the other end of the stick came in contact with the junk, it didn't feel right. There wasn't a plasticky crinkle from the wood hitting a plastic bag. It didn't give easily, like if it had hit clothes, but it wasn't completely unyielding either, like hitting a VCR or some other electronic. It was somewhere in the middle, firm, with slight yield to it. And I suddenly noticed the rustling had completely stopped. Michelle, I think there's something. something weird in here." She turned towards me, her eyes widening. "What, like a body?" I scrunched up my nose at her. "You watch too many of those true crime shows. No, not like a body. Like, it happened so fast. Something shot out of the dumpster. It wrapped around my hand, ice cold, and squeezing hard, pulling me inside. I snapped around and saw that it was a hand. I screamed. Michelle rushed to my side and grabbed my other hand, keeping me back. My feet scraped along the pavement. It was strong, so strong, gripping my hand so tight I thought my fingers would break. "Let go!" I screamed, as if it would listen. Michelle let go of my hand. Then she wrapped her arms around my waist and yanked as hard as she could. With a soft pop, my hand came free. I fell to the ground, moaning in pain. Then we looked up and stared in horror as the hand blindly groped around, fingers skittering along the metal, desperately trying to find my hand again, a source of flesh. Then it receded back into the pitch-black hole of the dumpster. Another rustling sound, as if something large was shifting among the junk inside. Something much larger than a single person. Michelle and I stood there, frozen, not exactly sure what we had just witnessed, not sure what the hell was going on inside the dumpster. I'm not sure donating is good for the community anymore. For months, I caught glimpses of Clara from the safety of my cubicle. So beautiful, faultless. Through innocent eavesdropping and pattern recall, I unknowingly learned almost every detail of her life. When she had lunch, who her friends were, and where she would be at any given moment of the workday. I even knew where she lived, as we both took the same bus to work. On the long commutes, she never so much as batted an eye in my direction, unfazed by my existence. Admiring from afar was all I ever did, but on this day, I felt an inexplicable urge to connect with her. After settling in at my workstation, I became aware of a grouping of words that made up an ominous internal dialogue. "This is the day. She will be yours." My blood ran cold. The choice of words and the cadence with which they were spoken. This voice was not my own. "Hello?" I asked quietly, unsure if what I had heard was even really there. A reply confirmed its presence. "You need her." I stood upright, officially rattled. "Who's there?" By this point, everyone was staring at me, including her. I smiled awkwardly. She made a perturbed look and walked away, seemingly frightened. A wonderful first exchange. Everyone else averted their eyes and returned to work. I sat down and attempted to do the same, chalking up my bizarre experience to a lack of sleep. I sugarcoated the denial further with an internet search that backed up this theory and confirmed that audible hallucinations were a side effect of the new allergy medicine I was taking. Satisfied with my haphazard research, I craned my neck around the confines of my cubicle and noticed that Clara was shuffling some papers around at the copy machine. A strange feeling overcame me in this moment. For whatever reason, I felt I could bear the distance between us no longer. My legs began moving, opposite the signals my brain tried sending them to stop. I couldn't believe what I was doing, but infatuation seemed to outweigh my fear. I felt such a strong need to just reach out and touch her. Just as I was about to take my final step in her direction, Our boss came over and pulled her aside to discuss some work-related matters. I sighed in relief, shaken by my own actions. Another internet search turned up evidence that sleep deprivation coupled with certain antihistamines can translate into a hormone imbalance, potentially leading to an increased libido. That must have been it, I thought. Despite its many holes, this explanation sat well with me, at least for a few moments.
Chase her down. Demand her attention.
The voice was back. Panic set in as I dove into my work and did my absolute best to ignore the taunting, as well as my new urges. This was easier said than done, especially with how often Clara walked by my cubicle to get to and from her various workplace destinations. At one point, I almost grabbed her leg as she strolled past. I was able to pull my arm back with the other. Luckily, she hadn't noticed. I tempered my outburst and went about business as usual. Although we went to work at the same time, Clara left an hour before I did, just in time to catch the last bus. My projects ran a little late, so I would usually have a willing coworker bring me home. On this day, however, it was the middle of winter, and there was a storm coming. Most of the staff had left early to beat the snow. I would have been smart to do the same, but focusing on my work was the only thing that kept my mind off Clara, which in turn kept the disembodied voice at bay. Closing time snuck up on me faster than expected.
Find her.
I stopped at the elevator. Please, just leave me alone, I begged in a hushed tone. The voice repeated its demand, louder this time.
Find her.
No, I shouted, fed up but still scared. The voice responded in kind.
Then suffer.
All at once, I stopped breathing. I felt my chest begin to cave in as the oxygen within dissipated. I fell to the floor before I could reach the phone at my station and call for help. Just as quickly as it started, the episode ended, and the air once again filled my lungs.
Do not disobey.
This warning was enough to render me terrified. From this point forward, I had no choice but to give in to the voice's commands. Some way, somehow, I would have to go to Clara. I pulled out my phone. As expected, there were no ride-sharing services available. A driving ban had just been issued due to the coming weather. Fantastic. Upon exiting the building without so much as a long-sleeved shirt to keep me warm, I headed off into the direction of Clara's home, backtracking over the route taken by our bus. It would take me roughly 4 hours to get to her by foot. Knowing this, I made long and firm strides in the hope of minimizing the amount of time it would take me to reach her. While walking down Main Street in this fashion, I noticed a lot of businesses closing up for the night due to the approaching blizzard. One of these shops was a local florist.
A gift.
Knowing what the voice had in mind, I pushed the door open just as the florist was about to lock up, startling the hell out of her. I grabbed the nearest rose I could find, threw some money down on the counter, and left in haste. I didn't wish to feel my lungs collapse again. I began power walking towards Clara's house, hoping I would beat the storm there. Before making it too far, I felt a sharp pain in my hand. I looked down and saw droplets of blood splattered across the ground. It was the rose. I had grabbed an uncut one, thorns and all. My palm was now bleeding profusely, but I kept walking. The voice returned to encourage me, but this time it was faint, barely a whisper.
She's waiting for you.
I trudged through the harsh winds, my pace never wavering. The storm was closing in. About the halfway point, I felt snow. It began falling at a swift and steady rate, making it almost impossible to see in front of me. I stood with my back to the current in an attempt to catch my breath, but another whispered incentive kept me going.
Continue.
I pressed on, feeling the sting of the snow on my bare face. After an hour or so, a mark formed on my arm. It was beginning to turn black. This was the onset of frostbite, I guessed. It only grew darker as time went on. The other soon followed suit. I could only assume that the rest of my skin was turning as well. I was concerned, but not enough to falter and face the deadly consequences. After another long and treacherous hour, I finally arrived at her street.
Be with her.
The lawn was covered in snow, but I could still see the stone walkway leading the way to the front door. I took a step onto it, but quickly fell to the ground, slipping on a sheet of ice. My arm met the unforgiving ground below. It was more than likely broken, but I couldn't feel a thing. I stood up and kept walking. Having more than likely heard the sound of my fall, Clara opened the front door and walked out to meet me. She simply looked at my frostbitten and disfigured form with a horrified expression. She raised her hand over her mouth in shock. I reached up and presented her the rose. I had little energy left to speak, but I managed to offer her a couple of words. For you. She stared at me, just as she had earlier. Those eyes of disgust, that look of confusion, it was now turning into sheer terror. Before I could offer an explanation, she began to scream. She screamed so loudly that a splitting pain consumed my ears. My feelings for her would not be reciprocated. Without warning, a swirling vortex of red energy burst from my skin and hung above us. We both cowered in its presence. Before we could escape, the entity rushed to Clara and wrapped itself around her arms and legs, pinning her in place. An all too familiar sound rang through the stormy night, and I understood what was happening. The voice was no longer in my head, and it was not happy with Clara.
Kill her.
Just as it had earlier in the day, my body moved without me. My arm was raised, and I noticed a red glow emanating from the rose, similar in color to the entity. I was compelled to strike Clara, to slash her open with its thorns. I did my best to resist, but my possessed legs quickly closed the gap between us. As my arm wound up for the attack, I cried out, "No!" I yelled, to which the entity responded,
Do as you are told.
I can't quite explain it, but in this bleak moment, an idea sprung to mind. Less a thought than it was a feeling. A last-ditch effort to fight back. Okay, I'll do it. Just please release me.
Very well. Make it quick.
My restraints were lifted. I was surprised it had complied, but did my best to not show it. I then looked at Clara, with saddened eyes. I'm sorry. I swung the rose and struck skin. Blood poured onto the snowy ground. My blood.
What are you doing?
I sliced open every inch of my skin I could see. In a low whisper, the voice pleaded with me.
No. Stop this at once. I beg you.
Clara was freed from her bindings and ran back into the house. I kept cutting until there was a pool of red surrounding me. I fell into it and slowly lost consciousness. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed. To my left was Clara, asleep in a chair. I was in a great deal of pain, but it seemed my wounds had been attended to. Better yet, I no longer felt the darkness within. I guess my plan worked. I tried to get up, knocking over my IV in the process. The noise woke Clara. "You're awake. Please, lie back down. You need your rest." Her eyes were just as beautiful as I remembered. "Are you okay?" I asked. "I'm fine. Just a little frazzled and confused is all." She picked up the IV and handed me a glass of water. "What was that thing? How did you know to stop it?" I had to dwell on it for a second to recollect all the details. I don't know. It was a strange sensation I became aware of. I felt as though it was tied to my veins in some way, a blood demon of sorts. Without my blood, it couldn't survive. She stared at me, silent. "You probably think I'm crazy, don't you?" She shot me an infectious smile. "I was there too. I heard it, saw it even. If you're crazy, we both are." We laughed. A far better exchange than my first, if I was keeping score. The rest of the day was nice. We talked for hours and really got to know each other. Before she left, Clara promised she would visit the following day. For a brief window, things were looking really good. But then, a familiar voice broke through, shattering the illusion.
I told you she would be yours.
I work as an ice road trucker. Every winter, I drive my semi up the Dalton Highway in Alaska to deliver supplies. Other drivers complain about how isolated the road is, but I love it. Driving through the expanses of snow-covered wilderness, surrounded by nothing but the stars. It's the dream. Well, it was the dream. Until the night of January 17th, 2017. I was driving the stretch between Coldfoot and the Purdue Bay oil field around midnight. It's the loneliest part of the highway. 200 plus miles with no gas stations, restaurants, no cell phone reception, no traces of civilization at all. Then my headlights rolled over a truck. It had skidded off the road and flipped on its side. From the distance, I couldn't tell if it was fresh or a week-old wreck the recovery crews just hadn't picked up yet. "Hey, Jim," I yelled. He was back in the sleeper. We drove together and took turns, so we didn't have to stop for the night. Besides, it was always safer to have a second person if we ran into an emergency. He poked his blonde head out. "What's up?" "Look." The wreck rapidly approached. It was dark. No headlights, no fire, no lights on in the cabin. Just a metal husk, breaking the otherwise monotonous Alaskan landscape. "Poor fella," he said, reaching for the cup in the holster. A long slurp echoed from behind me. "This road gets mighty nasty sometimes. Maybe we should stop, see if they might need help." "Nah, it's an old wreck. Look how dark it is." Uneasiness settled in my stomach. I'd always felt safe driving up the Dalton Highway because fellow truckers were so helpful. Once, when I had gotten a flat, no less than 3 stopped in to make sure I was all right. It was like we were all part of an unspoken brotherhood, looking out for one another. I stomped on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt. Hey, what are you doing?" Jim protested. "We're stopping?" "I'm sorry, I just need to make sure no one's in there." Leaving the headlights on, I swung the door open and pulled myself down. Wait, I'm coming," Jim called after me, putting on a coat. I didn't wait for him. Instead, I walked ahead, ice crunching noisily under my boots. The cold wind bit into my exposed face, and I grimaced. "Hello?" I called out into the darkness. No answer. "Anyone there?" I called again. "See, there's no one there," Jim said, coming up from behind me. "See, we stopped for nothing." I ignored him and walked towards the cabin. It was facing away from us, pointed towards the forest in the distance. The trailer was nondescript, no logo or color, but the back hatch was open, rolled up just a few inches. Jim called out behind me. "See, they moved all the supplies already. They even left the hatch open. This thing's probably been here for weeks." "Okay, I get it," I called back, annoyed. "I just want to check out the cabin, alright? Humor me." "Humor you? Huh, we're wasting precious time, Danny." I ignored him and walked across the frozen plain, my boots crunching loudly through the snow. I rounded the corner and came upon the cabin. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was a mangled mess of metal. The hood was crunched like a tin can. The side mirror dangled limply. There was no windshield, just a misshapen hole where it used to be. Through it, I could make out the driver's seat. It was horribly buckled and bent, conjuring awful images of what the driver must have looked like. "Hello?" I called through the window. It looked empty, but just in case, all was silent. "It's empty, huh?" Jim asked, a wild smile on his face. "Yeah, and I don't think the driver made it," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. "The highway, she takes 'em good sometimes. Nothing we can do, just the circle of life and all that." Great, Jim was being poetic now. "Okay, Jim," I said, cutting him off. "Let's get back to the road." That's when I noticed it. The snow around the truck was undisturbed. No swirl of frantic footprints from the rescue team. No tire tracks from the police cars racing to the scene. No grooves from the body being dragged away. The cabin was empty. The driver had most likely perished, and no rescue team had come out. Why weren't there any prints around here? I asked Jim. If the rescue team came out. "Must be weeks old, like I said. Probably snowed 10 times since they got him and the supplies out. Covered the prints right up." Yeah, I guess you're right. That did make sense. Now that I took a closer look, there weren't any skid marks in the snow from the truck either. Defeated, I turned and walked back towards our truck. "Wait, what's this?" I turned around. Jim was crouched in the snow, trailing a finger across the ground. "What's what?" "These prints." I walked back over and crouched beside him. There were several overlapping trails of footprints. They began at the back door of the trailer, weaved through the snow, and ended somewhere in the darkness of the plains. And they looked fresh. The edges were sharp and clean, not softened by the wind or the snowfall. That doesn't make any sense. We're in the middle of nowhere, not a single soul for miles around. Then who made these prints? I don't know. Well, let's find out. Jim walked over to the back door and with a grunt, pulled it open. The metallic sound reverberated through the trailer, echoing against the snow. I pulled a flashlight from my pocket and flicked it on. What the hell? The trailer looked lived in. Empty glass bottles glinted in the light, stacked up in a line against the wall. Clothing was strewn everywhere. In the right corner, they were piled up with a blanket to form a rough bed. There's nobody. Nobody for at least 200 miles, he said with fascination, pulling himself up into the trailer. What the heck is going on here? Hey, wait, I called after him. We shouldn't. There's tools back here, Danny, he called out, his voice echoing in the metal box. All kinds of knives and spears and stuff. I suppose that's how he gets his food, hunts it down. I stepped onto the lip of the trailer and hoisted myself inside. The air was musty, damp, and cold, though warmer than outside. The floor, which was really the side of the trailer, was tilted at a slight angle. I glanced around. While there were many household items I recognized, knives, shears, clothes, there were some I didn't. A black medallion, emblazoned with a strange symbol next to the bed area. A stone bowl and stick that resembled a mortar and pestle. Danny, take a look at this. I turned the flashlight towards him and jumped back. White bone, twisted mouths, sunken eye sockets, more than a dozen animal skulls, all lined up in a neat row at the back wall. The first was tiny, the size of a mouse head. They grew progressively larger. The last ones looked like they belonged to deer, caribou, and moose. And painted on the ground, under our feet, was some sort of symbol. A circle with strange characters all around it, like letters from an unknown language. This is freaking creepy, Jim said. I wish I brought my camera. Despite my thick jacket, a chill went up my spine. Come on, Jim, let's go. Like you said, we're wasting time. We'll get to Purdue late and... Oh, now you care about wasting time. His blue eyes met mine. You're just a scaredy cat. That's what you... We both froze. That sound had been faint, but in the absolute silence of the Alaskan wasteland, it was more than just a random sound. More than the wind, the forest, the earth could produce. You hear that? Jim whispered. We listened, but there was only silence. Okay, let's get out of here, Jim said, taking a step forward. We walked to the front of the trailer, our footsteps shaking the metal. Then we jumped out into the snow. My blood ran cold. A man stood in the darkness, dressed head to toe in black tattered clothing. A hood veiled his face in shadow, and a knife glinted in his right hand, catching the light of our headlights. We broke into a run. He bolted forward, crunching footsteps rang behind us, growing louder by the second. My lungs burned in the cold air, but I forced myself forward. My hand fell on the metal handle of the truck. I dove in. Jim followed me a second later. He madly pressed the lock button. I turned the key, and the engine rumbled underneath us. Drive, Jim yelled, panting. My headlights flashed over the man. He stood still in the snow, staring at us with wild blue eyes, gripping the knife tightly. And behind him, more figures materialized around the fallen trailer, all wearing black hooded clothing. They remained still, their heads turning to stare as we pulled onto the highway. Then they were left in the dust as we sped forward into the Alaskan wilderness. We called the police, but by the time they made it out there, the truck had been cleaned up. It was just an empty old wreck. No animal skulls, no strange symbols, no sign that anyone ever lived there. I hadn't driven a truck up the Dalton Highway since that night. I still deliver supplies, but to other parts of Alaska. Never again will I voluntarily drive up that cursed road. But sometimes I hear about disappearances along that highway. A lonely trucker here or there, vanishing into thin air. His vehicle left behind, parked on the side of the road. And I know he didn't just get lost on that lonely stretch of highway. He was taken. The counting killer is on the loose. The TV blared. I dropped my fork. Tomato sauce splattered on my shirt, then on the floor. He's very dangerous and has killed 12 people to date. Lock all your windows and doors. We have a search team underway. I leapt to the windows. Rain pattered outside, running down the glass in thick lines. I heard a click and ran to the door, my footsteps shaking the little house. I heard the chain slide against the metal. I turned back to the TV, my heart pounding. The police chief stepped down from the podium. A flurry of movement followed. Microphones, cameras, pushing towards the stage like the tide coming in. "Do you think he's going to kill someone tonight?" a man asked. "What kind of question is that?" He groaned and death glared the reporter. "Look, he's looking for a hideout. Might try to break into one of the houses near the penitentiary." Gasps and murmurs all around. "But don't worry, we'll catch him before that happens." A woman thrust a microphone into his face. "I heard he likes to stalk the victims through their house before killing them. Is that true?" "I cannot confirm or deny that," the chief said, the wrinkle in his brow deepening. "He's covering up," I thought, turning the volume up. Of course he can confirm that. Teresa Rivers, victim number 3, was stalked inside her house for hours. The forensic team even proved it. And he writes the number kill on each victim in their own blood, on their forehead. "Isn't that correct?" a man yelled. "Yes, that is correct," he said, his face starting to shine with sweat. "And I flicked off the TV, my heart fluttering wildly in my chest. Lightning flashed outside, throwing the backyard into relief. The swaying trees and wooden fence were white against the black sky. Shadows danced across the trees, the grass, the patio, and if one had too much imagination, they appeared to take form. I tugged at the blinds, pulling them over the glass door, but some of them were missing. The thunder rumbled outside, the windows rattled. Anxiety bubbled up inside of me, ready to burst, as I listened for sound over the fading thunder. Silence, save for the pitter-patter of the swelling rain. And then the lights went out. Just my luck, I thought. The power's out. Never should have chosen a house so far from the main road. I stumbled towards the kitchen, banging into just about every piece of furniture along the way. I pulled at the drawers madly. There's gotta be matches in here, I thought, as forks and knives clacked against each other. I stopped. What was that? The thud of footsteps, barely audible over the rain. Or was it just my imagination? Hands shaking, I grabbed the knife on the counter. No. A shadow. It disappeared behind the blinds, then reappeared in the gaps. Still frames of motion, like the pages of a flip book. I froze. The groan of metal resisting metal. The sound a locked door makes as someone tries to pry it open. Heart pounding, I ducked into the pantry. The air was thick and stale, steeped in expired bread and flour. I groped around for matches, a weapon, anything that might change my odds. but my hands only fell on cans of food. I locked the front door, the back door, the windows. I leaned against the shelves. They dug into my back. But even when everything is locked, there's always a way in. I gripped the knife harder. Footsteps, squelching on the hardwood floor, moving through the living room. "Looks empty," a man's voice said, muffled through the door. "Perfect. Maybe I can escape without him seeing me," I thought. "If he thinks the house is empty." My hand tightened around the doorknob. Footsteps sounded through the house, the dining room, then the family room. Pause. Louder towards the couch, the TV, the kitchen. I held a hand over my mouth, silencing my ragged breath. No, don't open this door." White light reflected off the floor, shining through the crack. And I heard a thump, but the door didn't open. More thumps. The footsteps retreated now. Yes. Taking a deep breath, I turned the doorknob. I sprinted out of the pantry, through the dining room, the family room. I was almost free. I could feel the doorknob in my hands, the rain on my back. I yelped. Cold, wet fingers clawed into my shoulder. "Don't move," he yelled, but I thrashed and wriggled, still gripping the knife. It slashed wildly at the man's arms. He crumpled to the floor, yelling in pain. Between me and the door, the man reached for his hip. A gun, gleaming in the dim light. I leapt up the stairs. Shouts rang out behind me. My legs burned, grew stiff, but I kept going. I heard a loud crack. A hole smoldered in the wall, a foot from my head. I ran and ran until I was in the master bedroom. "Ow," I hissed. My toe collided with something long and soft lying across the floor. Limping, I ran to the window, but nearly slipped, as the floor was wet beneath me. I ran into the closet. I swallowed the urge to cough. The fake, flowery smell from blouses and perfume was overpowering. "Don't make a sound. Make a sound and you're dead." "Do what I say, and I won't have to hurt you," the voice called out, hovering on the landing. I heard a stomp. "Just come back down here, and it'll all be over with." I gripped the knife harder. My shuddering breath seemed deafening in the tiny closet. I heard multiple stumps. "More are coming. You'll never win against all of us." I peered through the crack. The man's shadow fell across the doorway, thin and stretched, almost subhuman. The silhouette paused, mumbled something into his shoulder, and continued towards the closet. The blood froze in my veins. Shaking, I stood up. I rose the knife above my head. The doorknob turned. I rushed at him. In one smooth, powerful motion, the knife stabbed into his chest. I collapsed, several feet away from the body. I did it, I thought. I'm alive. I threw my head back and began to laugh. I thought for sure I was dead meat. I laughed and laughed until my sides were sore. Then I stuck my finger in the blood and traced it across the man's forehead. 15. Rumbling footsteps shook the house below. Shouts, murmurs, stomps. White rays of flashlight swept across the house. Damn it, he called for backup. I pushed the window open. With a deep breath, I slipped out of my victim's house and climbed down the flower wall. I landed in the soft, wet ground below. When I took off running into the forest, Do you have something that you truly, relentlessly desire? Despite your state of life, is there something else that you would go completely to the end of the world to get? Well, lucky for you, there's a way to achieve what you're looking for, and you won't need to go to the end of the world to get it. But you will need to go somewhere, and the place may be too out of reach for some. It's not far away, closer than one may believe, but there are certain requirements that some individuals may not meet. First, whatever it is that you seek, know that you must seriously desire what you want. In your eyes, it should be something you need. If you begin the journey without the correct state of mind, you will surely fail, as it will be near impossible to turn back once the journey begins. The second requirement is that you need a vehicle of sort. Most use a car, as it's the most comfortable choice. There have been a select few that have used small motorized vehicles, such as an ATV or motorcycle, but this has proven to be quite difficult, as the conditions of the journey can prove to be too bothersome. Do not use a vehicle too large or noticeable, as you will need some cover of night to be most safe. Also, while any sort of car will do, you may not want to choose the most expensive or cherished vehicle. You can take your slick new black Mercedes for the drive if you'd like, but don't expect it to come out in a pristine state. Make sure your vehicle is completely fueled before beginning the drive. The first task to accomplish is to locate the road. It doesn't have a name, it's not on a map, and technically, it doesn't even exist. It will only show up if you're looking for it at the right time, and you will only spot it if you know what to look for. Finally, you must be alone during the journey. You didn't think you'd be able to go with the group now, did you? It must be night when you begin. Choose the time of night where you believe the roads are the least populated. Drive to any area that is just a stretch of road surrounded by woods. Here's where you want to start paying close attention. If you're looking for the road, it will turn up eventually, but you need to search for the road's hint in order to pull down the right one. Once you're close, you will see or feel its signs, but what signs will be depends on what your desire is. For example, if you're in search of wealth, you may spot shimmers on the empty branches of trees, as if they resemble the shine of gold or diamonds. If you seek love, you may begin to see rose petals slowly dance in the light breeze, blowing in the road's direction. If you seek revenge, you might sense an ever-growing feeling of heat or anger in your body as you approach. Just know what it is you really want, and you'll have no problem finding the turn. Once you're sure you've found the revealed road, take a deep breath and turn down onto it. At this point, you have officially started down the nameless road, which brings you through 7 miles, leading to whatever it is you seek. Each mile will test your desire, and will expose if you really do want what you're searching for. Before you go any further, stop the car and be wary of a few advisements. Do not turn on the radio during the drive. Do not use a phone during the drive. Do not open the windows during the drive. Make sure they are closed before you continue. If you are riding a vehicle without windows or a top, then prepare for the worst, as the odds are heavily stacked against you. Do not attempt to leave your vehicle at any time. You'll never want to exceed 30 miles per hour, unless you're desperate to make it through a section of the road. And most importantly, as with any drive, buckle up. Feel free to prepare and make sure you're ready. Once the road has been entered, time has stopped, so you don't need to worry about losing the night. Though you may not notice, you're not actually in your own world anymore. Take one last moment to realize that once the first mile is over, there's no turning back. If you ponder turning back at all, know that you shouldn't even be on the journey in the first place. Once all is done, start continuing on the road. On the first mile, you won't see much change. The road passes through mostly woods, with a few miles being an exception. The air will turn a bit colder, in which you should turn on your heating system if the vehicle has one. You won't want to take your eyes off the road later. Take some time to calm any uneasiness by admiring some of the night sky. You'll see it completely lined with the stars, more than what you would ever believe possible. If the weather was cloudy beforehand, you'll also notice that the sky is now clear. On the second mile, the air will become even colder. This is primarily the reason why traveling in an open vehicle is very difficult. With each mile, the air will drop in temperature, even if the season should be warm. If the air is too cold to bear, even with the heat on, your only option is to speed up. With each mile, the road also becomes more complex, taking more turns and showing an increasing amount of road hazards. Be sure to always keep focused on the road in front of you, in order to avoid as many bumps or obstacles as possible. Hitting a few rocks and potholes won't hamper your progress too much, but you'll want to keep in the best condition for as long as possible. If your vehicle is forced to stop because of damage, then there's nothing left you can do but eventually freeze to death. On the third mile, you may begin to spot silhouettes of human figures in the lining of the trees. Pay no attention to them, even if they seem to get closer. It will be hard to resist peeking at their unnerving, distant appearance, but know that they will eventually reveal themselves later. At this mile, the road will become dirt if you weren't already driving on it in the beginning. Keep to the center of the path, as it will become narrow and wide at random intervals. On a quick side note, you should never attempt to turn around. You'll be left on a path which never ends. You would simply run out of fuel eventually, and be left to freeze in the cold conditions. On the fourth mile, you will not only see more of the figures, but you will begin to, in a sense, hear them. In the back of your mind, a very faint, unintelligible whisper will echo. These will come and go, but you can't stop them. If they become too bothersome or distracting, try and tune them out by thinking of what it is you desire. Attempting to listen and determine what the voices are saying will only attract them to you, and you want to be as far away from them as you can. They'll be closer later, so there's no use in bringing them near you this early. On the fifth mile, you will come to a clearing. The lining of trees to your left will disappear, to reveal a lake with no end, and a beaming great moon over the water. The illumination from the moon will be so spectacular that your vehicle's headlights will no longer be required. Restrain yourself from gazing at it. If you look at its light for even more than a few seconds, the road in front of you will end, throwing your vehicle into the water, in which you will freeze in mere minutes. The voices will be gone for this mile, but don't rejoice yet. They'll be back. On the sixth mile, take into account that you are more than halfway done. Despite the progress, you may lose hope here. The stars will have disappeared at this point, leaving the sky an empty black abyss. The clearing will have ended, leading you back into the woods. The only light you will have will be provided by your vehicle's headlights, but they will flicker from time to time, even if you're sure they're in perfect working order. If you have a radio in the vehicle, it will turn on here automatically. If you didn't turn it off beforehand, it will produce an overwhelming screech that will send you off the path. A calm voice will then begin to speak about your greatest fears, what it is you absolutely fear in your life. It will speak in a way that will cause you to visualize the words in your mind, so don't listen to it. If you begin to comprehend what it's saying, the horrors will prove too much for you to stay on the road safely. Attempting to turn off the radio will prove no use. Speed up if you need to. Just keep your mind off the voices as much as you can. As you approach the end of the mile, the voice will fade out of the speakers, leaving your ears at peace. For now. On the 7th mile, the voices from the figures will return. It won't sound like a whisper this time, but more like distant screams, growing closer with each second. At some point on this mile, you'll hear one of them in your ear, as if one of them were right behind you. This is because one of the figures have found their way into your vehicle. Do not turn around. Their faces will shock you to paralysis, leading you off the road. If you do not draw attention to it, it will become uninterested and hopefully leave. These beings are said to be the one who have traveled down this road before, but were not successful. They lived the remainder of their existence suffering in the darkness, with their only goal of being to bring other travelers down with them. It has been said from experience that these beings can't physically harm you, so as long as they don't cause you to wreck, you should be fine. On the 8th mile, the road here takes very sharp turns, which if overshot, will lead you to throw the vehicle into a pit through the trees. The cold is near fatal here. If you were going to have a glass or bottle of liquid in your vehicle, it would appear solid in mere seconds. The heating system will have become completely obsolete. Your headlights will flicker more, sometimes shutting off for a few seconds. You should brake if this happens, but do not completely stop. The figures will be following you at this point, and you should not stop for too long. They will surround and trap your vehicle. More of their screams can be heard from outside your doors, sometimes even sounding of maniacal laughter. Their hands will claw at your windows, desperate to reach in and feel something living. Do not look at them. They won't block your windshield, and the last thing you want to happen is to crash and be trapped with them. If you don't make it from here, pray that it's the freezing that ends you. On the 9th mile, your vehicle will stall, the headlights will shut off, as will all other systems inside. There's nothing you can do to prevent this. What you will need to do is close your eyes and immediately attempt to restart the vehicle. Keep your eyes closed, as the figures would have surely surrounded you at this point. The starting of the vehicle will frighten them, and they will all back away temporarily. This will give you a chance to start moving forward again. If you begin to hear the windows crack from their struggle, don't lose focus. The beings can alter the vehicle, but remember that they still do not have the strength to physically affect you. You will hear nothing but their voices rampage in your mind, as there could be anywhere between a dozen or 100 of them after you now. Once you start the vehicle, floor it. Floor it so long as you can stay on the path. When the mile's done, the beings will retreat. On the 10th mile, the voices of the beings will stop. If you were to look in your rearview mirror, you'll see them following you, but not as if they were chasing. They're watching you, as if they were seeing you off. As you go down the 10th mile, the road will be smoother, as if you were back on the 1st mile. The figures will be lining the sides of the path ahead of you. They won't be after you, but they will watch as you pass. Some have theorized that the beings are impressed here, that you have come a long way on the journey to what you desire. This is false. They are not impressed, but they are happy. They are happy you are about to approach the next mile. They are happy because you are most likely going to your death. On the 11th and final mile, everything in your vehicle will lose power, as it did on the 9th mile. The vehicle would normally be immobile, but you will still be moving. An unknown force will be pulling you forward. In the darkness, you will see a glowing red light up ahead, as if it were a light at the end of a tunnel. Close your eyes and cover them. Do whatever it takes to make sure you do not see what you are about to go through. Covering your ears would also be helpful, but keeping your eyes covered should be the higher priority. The red light is another clearing, but there's no moon or lake this time. Once it's entered, unrelenting and unconceivable noises will sound from all directions. No amount of bravery and conditioning will spare you from these sounds. The cold will turn to a merciless heat, burning all parts of the vehicle. You will feel the illusion of the flesh being burned off your bones, that every part of you is being destroyed as you travel through the screams and audible suffering. As long as you keep your eyes closed and resist the urge to see where you are, you will survive through the suffering. This will last a total of 31 seconds, but many fail to keep their vision closed during that time and are left to the worst fate of the road. Where is this mile located? Those who have survived do not know. Some have named it the transmission from hell, but whether it's part of hell is debatable. After the final mile, power will return. Stop the vehicle. Take a moment to possibly regain some of your sanity. Let the screaming in your ears begin to fade, and know that you have nearly completed your journey, with the hardest task overcome. Breathe, and begin to drive forward once again. After only a kilometer, your vehicle will arrive at a dead end. Stop here, and don't attempt to move again. Nothing will happen right this second, but do not be disappointed. Relax and close your eyes. Imagine in your mind what it is you've desired the entire time. It will most likely still be the same as when you entered, but with some, this desire may actually change through making this journey. Think about what it is that you went through, such terrifying and difficult means to acquire, and imagine possessing it in your hands. Once you have completely visualized this, slowly open your eyes. You will then find yourself at the beginning of the unnamed road, where you first began. This may confuse you, but know that you are finished. Your task is done. Your mind will then return to your reward. If what you desired was material, check in the back seat, or in the trunk if the object is larger. If the object was small enough, it might already be in your pocket. If what you desired was non-material, then do not be disappointed if the change is not immediate. Turn back to where you came from, and you will find in your life that what you wanted is there. You may have found the love of your dreams. You may have gained unnatural, unimaginable power. You may have put your most hated enemy to the most satisfying revenge possible. You will have no doubt gained what you deserved. So now that the task is done, what's the catch? Is your vehicle cursed? Is there something you're about to lose? Is your death imminent? The answer to all is no, of course. You've done the challenge. You've proved worthy to what you desire. As stated before, the sounds of the 11th mile will continue to exist in your mind, potentially causing you some vivid and unusual nightmares, but these should prove as nothing compared to what you've gained. Now, one last question. Is there something else you desire? Are you not yet satisfied? After all, you're right back where you started. The road's right in front of you. So are you up for another drive? If so, buckle up and just move forward. My name is Christina, and today is my first day seeing a psychologist. I've always been a troubled kid, but I've never actually needed to see someone to justify that. Well, not until now. A few weeks back, something happened. Even now, it's hard for me to think about it, even though I know I will have to. I can't just pretend everything is fine. I was at a house party with a couple of my friends. Tom and Alice were taking shots by my side as I watched on, a little worried. Admittedly, the two of them often overdid the drinking, so I usually stayed sober to make sure they'd be okay. Instead of drinking, you should try lucid dreaming. Alice cackled as she threw back another shot, tossing her head back as well. I gagged at the sight of pure alcohol coming from her. It wasn't long until she vomited and regretted all of her life choices. As her best friend, it was my duty to take care of her. She'd always said she would do the same for me one day, but that day, I shake my head, trying not to feel too much anger for my friend. She was drunk after all. Lucid dreaming? I asked, because really, I wanted to at least sound cool. Only, I had no idea what this lucid dreaming thing was. Yeah, you try to sleep on your back and meditate or whatever. It's like getting high. Apparently you can fly and stuff when you sleep like that. Control your movements, eat, whatever. For how drunk she was, Alice explained the concept well enough, and then barfed the last few shots out into the trash can before going in for another. You should just sleep here, Cindy, the host said, laying a hand on my shoulder. I stepped away, while she managed to walk in a straight line. She was clearly wasted as well. But she was right. I didn't feel very comfortable driving a puking Alice and Tom who was probably up to no good. Crashing on a bed and going back home the next morning sounded like a much better idea. And so, with the music still echoing off the walls, I curled up in Cindy's bed, only to be reminded of lucid dreaming again. I've never gotten high, and part of me wanted to at least try. What could go wrong, right? I grabbed my phone and did some research. I shouldn't have done that, but minutes later, I was listening to an audio that was sure to help me lucid dream. As the reliable friend, I wanted to just do something crazy for once. I should have just had a couple shots. See, as I listened to the crooning male voice coax me to relax, I became hyper-aware of my body. It felt weird, forcing myself to keep still, to stop wiggling my toes, to make my fingers stop clutching the blanket over me. Finally, it started. I felt as if I was anchored to the bed. The man from the audio said it was okay. All I needed was to push myself off, to take flight. But I couldn't. I tried to wiggle my toes at first, but they refused to move. My neck, too, felt as if it had glued to the cushion. The music still continued, as loud as ever. With the audio stopping, I could hear it again. But I couldn't react to it. I was paralyzed. I'd never heard of anything like this happening. But then again, I rarely dreamt. So, being in such a state was fascinating at first. I was hyper aware of everything going on around me. The heat of my blanket covering me, the noises, the way my chest rose and fell. My eyes, they were stuck open too, although all I could see was the ceiling. I tried to push myself away, once again, but nothing happened. And then, I heard it. A scream. "Alice! Alice!" I wanted to shout, knowing it was her, but my throat felt like it was stuffed with cotton. Breathing became a chore as I realized just how dry my mouth was, as if it was stuck open too. Maybe it was, but there was nothing I could do about it. Alice barged into the room, nearly tearing the door off the hinges. She wasn't herself. I knew that, but still. What the? Did you really do it? Huh. Look at the loser. Christina, can you move? I tried my hardest to nod, fearing the person I had thought to be my friend, but nothing happened. Gosh, look at you. Too smart for drugs, so you decided to get high in a different way. Huh. I've always wanted this. To see you motionless. This is not Alice, I thought to myself. But the way she leaned over me, her face obstructing my sight, made it hard to believe it wasn't Alice's perfectly manicured nails. And they seemed much longer, like claws, as she dragged them down the wall, creating deep scratches. The sound pierced my ears. It was like chalk against a chalkboard. I shuddered as those very nails wrapped around my face. But suddenly, the figure above me wasn't Alice anymore. Her features seemed to contort into something strange, inhumane almost. Makeup melted off her face, blending in with her skin until all that was left on her face was just black and nothing else. Her laughter, though, kept ringing in my ears. I felt pressure on my chest as if she was pushing down, and then I realized No. The creature was sitting on me. I'm going to suffocate, I thought, panic coursing through my entire body. Normally, this should have been enough, I was sure, for someone to snap out of this nightmare, but it wasn't for me. Alice cackled, showing teeth that I knew did not belong to her. They were yellow and disgusting, dripping with blood. The monster. No, Alice. No, the monster. It was going to bite me. I was sure of that, but I just couldn't move. My voice was still lost, but I struggled to at least scream, but all I managed was a quiet whine. And no help came. Alice, please, don't do this. I begged her in my mind. You always spoil my fun, Christina. Why do you even come with us if you don't like partying? Such a spoiled sport. You know what we do with people like you? Her voice was sweet like honey, but I felt nails press into my throat. I maniacally started to move again. I needed to at least roll away before I would get cut. We drowned them. Water. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even see anything, but it felt like water was enveloping my head from all sides. It burnt at my eyes, snuck into my nose, gurgled down my throat. I felt as if nothing but water existed around me. And then I woke up. But when I did, I was the one with fingers around someone's throat. Alice leaned over me, shock clear on her face. My grip tightened. I could move, but I was reluctant to peel them off, even as her face started to turn blue, as tears gathered in her eyes, as she stopped breathing. At first, I watched her go limp, fall, stiff from my hold on the wooden floor, head crashing painfully against the nightstand. I was certain I was still dreaming, paralyzed, so I pinched myself. My nails had little bits of skin stuck underneath them. The pinch hurt. Crap, Alice. It was too late. She was bleeding too much and too quickly. It must have been the cut on her head that killed her. But the marks around her neck were on display too. No matter how hard I tried to scrub them off before the door opened again. It was Tom, with 2 glasses of water. He was the one who called the police on me. The next day or so was a blur. Well, all these weeks had been, really. Alice was killed. By me. Apparently she'd gone upstairs to check on me, to make sure I was all right, because she had heard me screaming. And I killed her. I begged the policeman to understand that I had been paralyzed, that something else was controlling me. But why would anyone believe me? The ratty nerd who always envied her darling popular friend. The girl who never dared to do much but watch her friends have fun. So, here I am now, locked up, ready for my first time in therapy. In jail. Apparently, what had happened could still be ruled an accident. I could be freed after a few years. But what if history will repeat itself? Ever since then, I only sleep when I collapse out of exhaustion. I try to keep my mind busy, hoping that I never fall into that weird, possessed paralysis thing again. But it's getting harder and harder. I fear that one night I will fall asleep early, and I'll hurt someone again. Or hurt myself. Who knows? Anything can happen in that twisted state.